Chapter 33, The Great Depression and the New Deal, 1933 through 1939. Okay, intro. The intro is reminding us that Hoover is president and things are going very poorly. We see the stock market crash in 1929 and everyone's kind of blaming this, you could say, on Hoover, right? The shanty towns are called Hoovervilles. People are calling this the Hoover Depression. So, regardless of the Depression, we have a new presidential election in 1932. And, the voters are in a bad mood. We have about 11 million unemployed workers. We're seeing factories are closing. Just a bad thing. So, in 1932, the Republicans decide to stick with Hoover kind of unenthusiastically. They're like, well, we'll stick with Hoover. He is president after all. And their platform more or less is praising the small attempts they did make at kind of rectifying the horror of the Great Depression. Okay, the Democrats, they decide to nominate FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Yes, he is the fifth cousin of our friend we talked about during the Progressive Era, Theodore Roosevelt, but kind of very distant cousins. Anyway, FDR was the governor of New York, had been born in New York, very wealthy parents, very wealthy family, had gone to Harvard, then had experience as being a governor, had also been the assistant secretary of the Navy, and he was very suave, right? He had kind of just a great speaking voice, knew how to turn on the charm, so to speak. And really the idea here is with the 32 election, pretty much any Democrat would have beat Hoover. Hoover was extremely unpopular and people wanted to see a change. So pretty much almost anyone could have beat Hoover, but we see really FDR being that right person regardless. All right, Section A, FDR, politician in a wheelchair. Okay. So FDR had contracted polio later in life, and that left him very, I don't want to say the word, but crippled. He couldn't really use his legs, very, very weak. He did have metal braces on his legs, so he could kind of hobble around with the use of a cane or with the assistance of a person just kind of swinging his hips. But we see he is, in the most part, in a wheelchair. But his illness taught him patience, tolerance, compassion, self-control. And right along with FDR, we have to talk about his wife, his very, very famous wife, Eleanor Roosevelt. Okay, Eleanor Roosevelt had a huge influence not only on her husband, but also on kind of the federal policies at this time. She was known as the conscience of the New Deal. The New Deal being the name given to all of these programs that FDR will put in place during his presidency. And we really see Eleanor being the champion of those who had been kind of brushed aside from society. And she, really, his political career was her political career. She was they were part and parcel, so to speak, right together. She herself had an impressive background. She had worked in a New York settlement house for a while, was definitely involved with the Women's Trade Union, the League of Women Voters, and so when she came to D.C. along with her husband after her husband won, we see kind of Eleanor brings with her this huge group of women activists. And we really see Eleanor being the most active First Lady in history. She makes an impact. She's writing speeches, giving speeches on behalf of her husband. She has a newspaper column that people read across the country. Some side note here, while Eleanor and FDR did a lot of good together, their relationship, their marriage was quite rocky because FDR had a number of affairs. I shouldn't say a number of affairs, but he had an affair during the marriage. She found out about it, so their relationship was actually quite rocky. Anyway, so FDR is kind of a controversial figure. The liberals loved him, the conservatives hated him, because he was there going to make some changes. He was going to make something happen. Okay, so continuing to talk about FDR, like I said, commanding presence, really a golden speaking voice. He was kind of the greatest orator of his generation, just a really well-equipped politician, you could say. Yeah, we saw when he was governor of New York, his policy was to spend federal money to help out those affected by the Depression. So he'll kind of bring that policy with him to the federal government. And people called him a traitor to his class, meaning that he was from this very aristocratic, very wealthy family, but now he's not really focusing on the wealthy, he's really focusing in on those who are hurting the most from the Depression. So people called him a traitor to his class because he kind of helped the poor, sometimes you could say at the expense of the wealthy, but really he had a deep concern for what he called the forgotten man, the man that had kind of been brushed aside from society, who needed help. The platform of the Democratic Party, they wanted a balanced budget, which meant, stay within your means, don't spend beyond your means. And also they wanted to repeal prohibition. They wanted just kind of a sweeping program of social and economic reforms. And so he is nominated by the Democratic Party in Chicago. And he, makes this unprecedented move by he actually flies to Chicago and accepts the nomination from the Democratic Convention in person. Nowadays, that happens all the time, right? If you're nominated by the convention, you're at the convention to accept the nomination, but it's really FDR who kind of set that precedent. And when he was giving his speech to accept the nomination from the Democrats in Chicago, he says, I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people. So when we're talking about the New Deal, that's just the name for the, economic and social reforms he's going to make, kind of his policies as the president. Remember, Theodore Roosevelt, he had the new nationalism, Wilson had the new freedom, and now we have kind of the policies that FDR will create is called the New Deal. Okay, section B, presidential hopefuls of 1932. So FDR was on the road campaigning, and he really wanted to attack the Republicans, but also he really was eager to prove that he wasn't an invalid, that yes, he had been sick in the past, and yes, he didn't have the use of his legs, but he really wanted to prove to America that he was up to the task, that he was healthy now, that he had vigor, he had life, he could take on the job. A lot of times he would choose different speaking venues that would allow him to appear as if he was completely well, completely healthy. Sometimes he would be sitting in a car talking to the press. A lot of times he'll have his son or someone help him stand up or help him walk from place to place, but he really wanted to make sure that people knew he was up for the job. And also one of the wonderful things he did is he surrounded himself with good people. A lot of these people were young professors who really had a grasp on what was going on economically, and this was called his brain trust, okay? FDR, New Deal, brain trust. And the brain trust during this election even wrote a lot of his speeches, and we'll see it's actually the brain trust who brings forth or composes a lot of the legislation that is passed as a part of his New Deal. And, like I said, what the Democrats were really trying to show is that the Republicans were bad. They attacked the fact that the Republicans had passed the Reconstruction Finance Corporation because he said that was a bad thing. You're spending money you didn't have. Bad Republicans. Which is completely ironic because once FDR actually does get in office, that is exactly what FDR does. He spends, trying to kind of prime the pump, so to speak, trying to get the economic juices a-flowing, okay? Well, nonetheless, Section C, Hoover's humiliation in 1932. As I alluded to before, and as the section title alludes to, FDR is going to win the 1932 election. For electoral votes, he gets 472 to only 59 for Hoover. And this is, the 32 election is notable for a number of reasons. One being that this is the first election where we see the majority of African Americans actually vote for a Democratic president. even up to this time, even up to the 1930s, a lot or the majority of the African Americans who were able to vote voted for, you know, the party of Lincoln, voted for the Republicans kind of as a nod to their hero, to Lincoln, the president who had emancipated them from slavery. So we see that sort of shift. And really what drew a lot of African Americans to FDR was their hope for a new beginning. You know, a lot of times in these factories, the policy was the last hired would be the first fired. So we see really depression just hitting African Americans the hardest. And so now they're switching gears. They're voting for Democrats, and this is the first time we'll see that. And you know, like we mentioned before, the truth is any decent Democrat could have beat, you know, Hoover. Hoover, I don't know, it was wishful thinking even nominating him, because he was just so much associated with the Depression that no one would vote for him, which isn't true, right? He got 59 electoral votes, someone did. But anyway, here's the deal. This has since switched, but remember, the elections are in November. But during this time, inauguration wasn't till March. So you had 4 months where Hoover was still president. FDR had been elected. FDR was going to become president in March. But those 4 months, it was kind of a strange deal because Hoover couldn't really make any long-term plans because he was going to be out of there in March. So we see Hoover during this 4 months as a lame duck, right? That's the title we give to these presidents at this time, a lame duck president. He goes to FDR, you know, meets with him twice, trying to, you know, hey, FDR, what are some of your ideas? Maybe I can get those moving for you. But FDR more or less refuses to take any responsibility for anything during these 4 months. So we see a 4 months, you know, America was just struggling with the Great Depression. And for these 4 months of kind of Hoover's lame duck presidency, we see really nothing pass. And the country's hurting hard. Some even critics accuse FDR of not doing anything or not cooperating with Hoover during these 4 months. So he would seem even more of a hero once he did get into office. All right. Section D, FDR and the 3 R's, relief, recovery, and reform. Okay, FDR, inaugurated March 4th, 1933, you know, declares that the government must wage war on the Great Depression, saying that the government is going to get involved. We are not going to say back, no more laissez-faire, we're going to get our hands dirty, so to speak. And during his inauguration speech, he famously says, "Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself." Oh, FDR, you're inspiring me already. Okay, so one of the first things FDR does is he declares a nationwide bank holiday. And this is from March 6th through March 10th, saying that all of the banks across the United States are going to close. Because what was happening is people were continuing to withdraw their funds from the bank. So banks, you know, were having, you know, it was just a mess. So he's like, we're going to close the banks. We're going to give them some time to kind of reorganize, to kind of breathe, give them a pause a little bit, and to keep people from withdrawing the funds. And what he does almost immediately on March of that year, he calls Congress to a special session. And this is called the 100 Days Congress. Okay, the first 100 days or so, March to June of 1933, this 100 days is really important because this is when he's calling all the congressmen in, and this is where the rubber hits the road. They're going to start passing an unprecedented amount of legislation to help those 3 R's, relief, recovery, and reform. Okay, and like I said, these policies will become known as FDR's New Deal. Okay, relief, the idea of kind of short-term legislation that helps out right now. Reform being kind of those long-term measures, and then recovery kind of overlapping both of those categories, really just to help America settle down a little bit, so to speak. Yes. If you would like to see a chart, there's literally a chart on page 827 of the 3 R's, relief, recovery, and reform. If you want to see the different programs that developed to help with each of these areas, you can. Okay. So, Congress has called for this 100-day special session, and they were feeling the panic of their constituents, right? They were eager to try something out. They wanted to make a change. And a lot of the bills that they ended up passing gave FDR kind of an unprecedented amount of political power. They were desperate. They were willing to give as much power to FDR as he wanted. One of the critics of FDR said, if FDR asked Congress to commit suicide tomorrow, they do it. So they're definitely eager, do whatever it takes, let's just get some stuff passed to help people out. And a lot of, the stuff that FDR, wants to have passed, it's kind of like off-the-cuff stuff. He was kind of following his gut feeling. He didn't have this plan. Remember Wilson, he had like, we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. That's not FDR. FDR is like, okay, we're going to go in there, we're going to make a difference. I'm not quite sure what we're going to do, but we're going to try something. He compared himself to a quarterback, saying that I don't know what my next move is going to be until I see how this play goes. So really kind of off the cuff, just eager to get something changed. And we see a lot of the New Deal programs owing much of their legacy to the pre-World War I progressive era. So remember we had that era, Theodore Roosevelt, they had a lot of, different policies that were very progressive. And then we had, World War I and kind of put it on the pause. So now we're seeing a lot of those ideas kind of being reawakened, right? Conservation of natural resources, unemployment insurance, Social Security or an old age insurance, restriction on child labor, minimum wage requirements, regulations, that sort of thing. So a lot of these sound very progressive. They're kind of harkening back to the progressive era. Okay. Section E, Roosevelt manages the money. Okay, so 1933, of course that's the year during this 100 days Congress, we see the Emergency Banking Relief Act pass, and this gave the president power to regulate banking transactions and foreign exchange. So we're seeing the president once again taking on more power. And what he does is he really wants Americans to feel safe with putting their money back into banks. Right? This section is talking about managing the money. And people are scared because they had saw, maybe themselves had lost a lot of money when a bank closed. So people are hoarding money in their homes, putting it under the mattress, so to speak. So what Roosevelt does is he goes to the radio and he gives the first of one of 30 of what are called fireside chats. And what it is, it's a program on the radio program where he talks to everyday Americans as if they were sitting around a fireside, not using big words, using his golden voice, being really reassuring, using analogies that made sense, just really breaking it down like you would if you're talking to a friend. And in this first fireside chat, he tells Americans that it's now safe to put your money back into the bank. It is safer to have your money in the bank than it is to have your money under a mattress. And this really works, okay? People, after this fireside chat, will actually put more money into the bank than they had withdrawn. So we see this being a very positive thing. People are having a lot of, trust in the banks. And, it's not just the fireside chat that causes them to trust the banks, but we also see something passed in Congress called the GlassSteagall Banking Reform Act. And what this does, the GlassSteagall Banking Reform Act, it sets up the FDIC, which is definitely still around today, the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which insures individual deposits at that time up to $5,000. So even if your bank failed, if something went horribly wrong, your bank closed, you would still be insured at least that $5,000 you had in there. So every person who had money in the bank was insured up to $5,000. So really, preventing, or not preventing, but really giving people a lot of insurance, a lot of safe feeling when it came to the fear of banks closing. So FDIC, created by the GlassSteagall Banking Reform Act. Okay, and also when we're talking about money, what Roosevelt wants to do is he wants to cause some inflation, okay? Because inflation is good for people in debt. And a lot of people are in debt. So he wants to help out the people in debt by causing inflation. So what he does is he tells that everyone, he orders all private holdings of gold to be surrendered to the Treasury in exchange for paper currency. So everyone who's kind of hoarding gold, hoarding silver, is like, no, turn that into the bank, get paper currency. And then what he does is he takes America off of the gold standard. Okay? By taking America off of the gold standard, that's going to kind of decrease the value of a dollar, decrease the value of paper money. And when that is decreased, we see an increase, or we see inflation, right? Goods become more expensive because the dollar is less valuable. And he does this on purpose because the idea, once again, if you make money less valuable, that's going to lead to inflation, and inflation is a wonderful thing if you are in debt because it's easier to pay off your debts. All right, in F, creating jobs for the jobless. Okay, so 1 in 4 workers are unemployed when FDR takes office March 4th, 1933. And that's the highest rate they had ever seen up to that point of unemployment, and that's the highest rate since. So this is a huge 25% unemployment. And so what we see is a lot of kind of these New Deal ABC agencies. We'll see 100,000 different acronyms when it comes to the New Deal, because every New Deal program had an acronym. So we'll be seeing a lot of the WPA, the CCC, the CWA, the AAA. We'll be talking almost in code, okay? So just hold on with me, because a lot of these agencies are almost more better known by their acronyms than their full titles. So this is kind of what some of these legislation is coming out of that first 100 Days Congress. Okay, so let's talk about some of these relief efforts. The first thing well, not the first, but one of the first things he creates was the CCC, right? The Catechism of the Catholic Church. Just kidding. The CCC stands for the Civilian Conservation Corps. Just so you know, you do not pronounce the S at the end of that word. It's corps, it's not corpse. That's not the word. So the Civilian Conservation Corps was maybe one of the most popular of the New Deal programs. And what it does is it gives jobs to about 3 million young men. So the young men join the CCC, and it feels almost like militant. They're wearing uniforms, they're kind of, they're housed, they're fed in groups. And what they do is they're giving jobs by the federal government, whether that be planting trees or reforesting an area, fighting fires, draining swamps, just whatever sort of, task might be needing to be done, the CCC was there to help. And the idea was a lot of these young men, they had free housing, they had free board or free food. So what they would do is a lot of that money that they did make through the CCC was sent home to mom and dad to help, relieve some of their financial woes. Okay, another thing that is passed is the Federal Emergency Relief Act. And this is, focusing on immediate relief rather than long-time reforms or long-term reforms. And the Federal Emergency Relief Act created the Federal Emergency Relief Administrations, FERA, Federal Emergency Relief Administration. And this was headed by Harry Hopkins. Harry Hopkins is going to be one of FDR's, he's a friend, but also will become one of his top advisors. So Harry Hopkins is a big name when it comes to FDR, when it comes to the New Deal. And we'll see Harry Hopkins head the FERA, and he is a New York social worker who had befriended FDR during FDR's governorship. And yeah, so let's talk about the FERA. What it did is it gave $3 billion to individual states, and the states could take that money to just hand it out as welfare, as a dole, just give it as money to those in need, or it preferred that the state took their chunk of that $3 billion and used it to hire people to, to work on jobs that need to be done around the state. Okay. So some more programs. We have the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which gave millions of dollars to farmers to help them to pay their mortgages. And if they could pay their mortgages, that meant they could keep their farms. So the AAA helps farmers pay their mortgage so they can keep their farms. Something very similar to that is the HOLC. HOLC stands for Homeowners Loan Corporation. And the Homeowners Loan Corporation, a lot like the AAA, in the fact that they are getting money, or homeowners are receiving money to help pay the mortgage on their home so they can keep their home, which is, of course, a wonderful thing to a lot of these middle-class families who are at risk of losing their homes. So we'll see actually the HOLA really endear the Democratic Party to their hearts. So a lot of people who are maybe Republicans are definitely maybe switching to the Democratic Party because of reforms they like the HOLA. But also it's just, in effect also helps the banks, because if people can pay their mortgages, it helps the banks as well keep afloat. All right. Another administration, the CWA, Civil Works Administration. And what this does is it provided temporary jobs to tens of thousands of unemployed people. And they wouldn't be employed in anything from like leaf raking to any kind of make-work projects, anything that people could kind of invent to give them a job. And this was not the most successful program because it led to a lot of shovel leaning, meaning that a lot of people who were employed by the CWA didn't have a lot of motivation to work hard, so it was criticized a little bit with that. But once again, it's another one of the alphabet soup administrations trying to just help bring some relief to Americans. Okay, Section G, a day for every demagogue. All right, so just so you know, a demagogue is kind of a politician who gains support by appealing to people's emotions. Oftentimes, they'll make outrageous claims or outrageous promises, really appealing to people's emotions, not necessarily their intellect, to kind of bring about support. So we'll see a lot of demagogues kind of hopping up or springing out during the Great Depression, because people want someone they can look to for hope. And a lot of these demagogues at the same hand are kind of anti the New Deal. The New Deal is not the way to go. I have the answers. And they make these big promises that really are kind of ludicrous that no one can really keep. Nonetheless, let's look at a couple of these demagogues. Okay. First one is Father Charles Coughlin. Okay, he was actually a Catholic priest, right? That's why I call him Father Charles. Father Charles Coughlin was a Catholic priest from Michigan, and he believed that relief wasn't coming quick enough. So he criticized the New Deal for not doing enough. And his ideas got very radical, you could say, fairly quickly. He had a radio talk show. I don't know if you call it a talk show, but a radio program that had about 40 million listeners. So he had a big audience. But after a while, he was getting very critical, getting very radical. So his religious superiors, you could say, from the church said, we're going to pull the plug on your radio show. We're going to calm you down a little bit. But nonetheless, an example of a demagogue. Another one is Dr. Francis E. Townsend. Francis Townsend, like I said, doctor, he was retired from California. And he was really the voice for all of these kind of non-working age elderly folks. So we see a lot of those programs that the New Deal was passing, at least right away, was really relief for the working class. But you have to keep in mind a lot of retired folks had lost their money through bank failures, through perhaps the stock market, and they needed some help as well. And Dr. Townsend really was the voice for their suffering, so to speak. But he, was making these promises he couldn't keep. He thought that everyone over 60 should get $200 a month in relief. And that really appealed to a lot of the retired folks. But the idea is like, well, where's the United States going to get this money? Okay, where's this money going to come from? Anyway, another demagogue is Senator Huey Long of Louisiana. He's known as the Kingfish. And Senator Long, he had this idea of a program called Share Our Wealth Program, which more or less he promised to make every man a king, and that everyone would get, or every family would get, $5,000, and they would get this money by taking it from the wealthy and giving it to the middle class, giving it to the poor folks, kind of like what's the name? A Robin Hood idea, taking money from the rich and giving it to the poor. So kind of a ludicrous, kind of a big idea, but a lot of people responded to this. I could use $5,000. Maybe Senator Long isn't so crazy after all. Well, poor Senator Long, unfortunately for him in 1935, I believe, no, I don't remember, but Senator Long is actually, killed in 1935 when he was in Louisiana state capitol. So he was assassinated. So that was kind of the last we heard of him. Okay, and here's the deal. We're getting a lot of these demagogues. We're getting people like Coughlin, like Long, like Townsend, and people are worrying that this economic crisis might lead to or give rise to fascism in America. Okay, so fascism is the idea that there is going to be one kind of all-powerful dictator who would crush any opposition to his authority. And people were starting to be scared that this might happen in America. Okay, during this time we see Japan really, their leader in Japan was really becoming almost like a dictator, or really authoritarian rule in Japan. We're seeing Hitler gaining a lot of authority in Germany. And people were scared that FDR might turn into a dictator. He's getting a lot of power from Congress, and people were worried, hearing all of these, radical ideas that fascism might come to America. Anyway, so this section kind of ends rather randomly by talking about the last and one of the biggest New Deal programs, and this is called the WPA. The WPA, Works Progress Administration, created in 1935. And once again, this is led by Harry Hopkins, okay, one of FDR's close advisors. And what it was is gave $11 billion to this program, and this program would create jobs for people. Anything from building roads to building bridges to building public buildings or working on public buildings, some random things like controlling the cricket population in Wyoming, building monkey cages in, I don't remember, in Oklahoma City. John Steinbeck, who was obviously alive during this time, famous for writing The Grapes of Wrath, he actually got work from the WPA by counting the number of dogs that were living in the county he was from in California. So just really creating jobs. But these jobs weren't all manual labor. They also employed a lot of artists, a lot of musicians, a lot of painters. And this was called the Federal Art Program, kind of under the wing of the WPA. And the Federal Art Program, like I said, hired artists to create posters, paint murals. A lot of those murals are still around today in post offices, working on public buildings. And over 8 years where the federal, or the WPA was existing, it created about 9 billion jobs. So it really did a good job getting people working, getting people money. And it was really, we see a lot of these New Deal programs having the same theme. Spending money by hiring people to do something. Not just giving welfare checks out to people, but gave them dignity to, actually be working for the money. And also we got some wonderful things out of it. We got better roads, we got dams built. I know the hometown I'm from, every once in a while you'll see, WPA 1936 in the sidewalk because the Works Progress Administration had helped build, or I don't know if you build the sidewalk, but yeah, built the sidewalk, that sort of thing. All right, that is it for this video. We'll continue on with more New Deal programs and resistance to the New Deal programs in the next video.